For Monty Smith, no woman will ever come close to his first love.
Tabitha, she was beautiful. Always had her makeup done, her hair was always perfect, and we just had this bond right away.
Definitely two beautiful people that were attracted to each other. A lot of chemistry.
But one Halloween night, he's bewitched by sexy Shayna Sims.
Someone just kind of grabbed me by my shirt. Dark hair, pretty face.
Shayna didn't have a bad side. You just never knew when it was going to come out or what was going to happen.
And his life becomes a horror show.
It's macabre, it's disturbing, it's reprehensible.
I could not believe what I was hearing. I can't even believe that this is the woman that I'm married to.
It is the most bizarre set of circumstances I've ever covered in 31 years.
I grew up an only child, just me and my mom. She had me at an early age, 19.
In the 1980s, Monty Smith is an only child, growing up in Okmulgee, Oklahoma. His dad is not present in his life, so his mom is everything to Monty.
She was about 5'1", little woman, but she was spicy. Straight to the point with me. She's like, I'm not gonna let you grow up be a bad kid. I'm gonna be telling you what's right and wrong. She was good at that.
He was very close to his mom. That was his rock. I have childhood memories of Monty and I, playing in the backyard while our mothers were inside, doing their thing.
Monty's mother is in ill health for most of his childhood with kidney disease.
My mom was on dialysis for my whole life. 3 days a week, we had to go to the hospital, and for 8 hours at a time for her to do dialysis. She was a very strong woman, though. She still, was able to hold a job down, too.
He was going to school. He was at home, making sure his mom had what she needed or they needed. He definitely had to grow up a lot faster than the rest of us.
Whenever Monty gets the chance, he heads to the basketball court with his best friend, Jermaine.
Basketball was a big thing, so we played basketball nonstop. Everybody wanted to be the star player, the most popular.
We always had a ball in our hand. For Monty, it was strictly basketball. He was a very good basketball player.
After graduating from high school, Monty attends college, but he and Jermaine still have time to play ball. This is how they meet Monty's first love, Tabitha Lynch, in 1993.
Tabitha and Monty grew close very quickly. The way that they looked at each other, I could tell that was his first love.
We were a magnet towards each other. I did kind of feel like I, was a lucky guy because we just always had a good time together no matter what we did. There was never any arguing, just had fun all the time.
After dating for 3 years, Monty and Tabitha eventually drift apart.
She was in college playing basketball, and so was I. She was at a different school, so we didn't get to see each other a lot.
I know life happens, but I would have definitely liked to have seen them stay together back in those days. That was definitely the one that got away from Monty.
After college, Monty becomes a mechanic and gets married. But 10 years later, as his mother's health deteriorates, so too does his marriage.
Monty, of course, wanted to be around his mother more. Definitely played a role in his relationship with his wife.
After me and my wife had split up, my mother had a stroke. And then there was, just her health just went quickly.
It took a rough toll, and it took a toll on him mentally.
But the day that I found out that she passed, I was on a motorcycle ride out of town. That was a hard moment, and I was crying inside my helmet. Yeah, I felt empty after my mom's gone, I was just trying to get through one day at a time and hide my emotions from everybody, I worked as much as I could. I developed this new passion for motorcycles. So I just, get on my bike and ride when I could. That was my escape.
On Halloween night in 2010, Monty's life begins looking up when he attends a party at a local club.
So we walk in, there was a lot of good costumes there. I was standing there and someone just kind of grabbed me by my shirt, and before I can get a chance to see what was happening, I was being pulled onto the dance floor and then never even faced me. She's just looking the other way and dancing with me. I didn't know what to think about her at first. I was like, that's kind of aggressive approach right there. So then that song was over and I walked over to the stand by the bar area, and then she came with me. I said, my name's Monty. And she said, oh, my name's Shayna.
Shayna Sims is a 22-year-old hairstylist.
She was about the same height as me, and that's kind of tall for a woman. She had dark hair, pretty face. We just kept talking. She stayed by my side for the rest of the night. That was a nice feeling to have a pretty girl like that interested in me, because I was kind of feeling down on myself a little bit, right before that happened. We went back to her house. I spent the night there with her the first night, just talking and hanging out till the sun came up.
The relationship moves quickly, and a few months later, in January 2011, they move in together.
It was never a dull moment, I'll say that. We had fun, did a lot of things together.
I remember him being excited when he told me that he had met Shayna and how he lit up when he talked about Shayna originally.
The next thing I know, we started talking about, well, maybe we should get married.
Just a few weeks later, Monty surprises Shayna with a ring.
So we're at dinner. I waited for the right moment, and then I got down on one knee. I asked her, to marry me, and she said yes. I put the ring on her finger. She just was very excited and happy.
He was all in on this relationship, and this is what he wanted. She seemed to be feeling the same way, so I was very supportive.
We had decided to get married at the Tulsa Historical Society. She did all the prep work herself, which I was kind of amazed by that. I was really nervous, but from the moment that I seen her come out and I seen that smile on her face, it felt right. Everybody was encouraging to us. It was a great day.
He wanted to be the husband and the father and the family man that he never had. So he very much looked forward to that.
I had came home from work one day and she had this smile on her face. And I'm like, what are you smiling about? So I think I remember her saying, come here, I'm gonna show you something. So she showed me the pregnancy test. It showed positive and I felt happy, excited to be a dad.
As an expectant father, Monty is fully invested in Shayna having a healthy pregnancy. So he is surprised and concerned one day when he becomes aware of a potential problem.
We had a doctor's appointment, just normal routine. The doctors came into the room and told us they did not support my mother taking pain medication during pregnancy.
Shayna, who had been complaining of leg pain, has been self-medicating for months with Percocet and Lortabs, both highly addictive opioids.
She went to a pain specialist doctor, and I was unaware of this. So I was at work at this time, so I'm pretty sure that she did not tell them that she was pregnant, and they proceeded to help her with her pain level.
Her obstetrician has become aware of Shayna's drug use through routine lab tests.
They could not help her anymore, that she needed to look for another doctor to help deliver her baby. I was furious. I can't believe that you could endanger your child like that. I found the medication in her purse, confronted her. I said, you're not taking any more of these right now because I'm taking them from you. So you can't have these anymore.
Monty's daughter is born 6 months later.
She came out She heard my voice and stopped crying and opened her eyes and looked for me. At that moment, our bond was created. She's healthy, no problems whatsoever. I was very happy about that, and that the things that her mom had done early on did not affect her. Shayna seemed happy to be a new mom again to this pretty little girl. At that point, we had a good relationship pretty much. After my daughter was just a few months old, I switched to night shift on my job. So 3 in the evenings till midnight, working hard to provide as much as I can for my family since I'm the only one working right now.
While Monty works, he believes his baby daughter is tucked safely in bed during his shift. But he is wrong.
I would come home at midnight. I would notice that she's just getting home right when I am and bringing my daughter in the house, out of the car seat. She hadn't been home all evening long. She just said, I'm out running errands. It's okay. She said, I don't see anything wrong with that. I told her that she shouldn't be out with my daughter all evening long, that she needed to be home in the bed. I started to become more aggravated. We had a lot of arguments.
One night, Monty arrives home to find Shayna in bed, although she's not quite alone.
She's passed out. Her phone is laying face up on the bed and is on FaceTime with some other young man that I do not know. Couldn't believe it.
And I started seeing the signs from Shayna that maybe she wasn't the person that she's seeming to be. She became very evil very quickly.
Monty Smith has just found his wife Shayna in bed and on FaceTime with another man.
I look at the phone, she's passed out, unaware that I'm even right there looking at her phone. No clue. A lot of things went through my mind. But number one was, how could you? My daughter's right there in the other room. The next day, I brought it up and talked to her about it. And she said, well, I don't remember that. Denial.
Monty did mention a lot that Shayna would just lie about nothing, lie to be lying.
I was pretty upset, pretty angry. At this point, the trust is gone.
When I hear these things myself, I'm thinking, Monty, you got to do something about this before it gets worse.
And indeed, things do get worse.
One day we have an argument. She's, not letting me go out the door. I said, I have to go to work. Excuse me, move out of my way. And then she says, no, you're not going to touch me. If you do, you're going to go to jail. And I said, what do you mean by that?
This is when Shayna reveals just how low she will sink to get her own way.
She's like, well, because you're black. And they're going to take you to jail before they would me. After her saying that to me, I was really, really done. And I wanted to just leave.
They do have a daughter together. That was the main reason for Monty wanting to stay. He wanted to not have a broken home. So he made his decisions to stay.
Soon, Shayna's erratic behavior escalates outside the home.
Monty had taken Shayna to go tan. He stayed outside in the car with the baby.
Unbeknownst to Monty, while inside, Shayna overreacts to something trivial and flies off the handle.
While he was sitting in the car with the baby, 2 police cars pulled up outside the tanning salon. He said, hey man, I think something's happening. And yeah, she was having a scene inside the tanning salon, ended up, cursing out some ladies that worked there, and they called the cops, and, they eventually, kicked her out. It was at that point, I told him, I said, hey man, I love you, brother, but you need to figure this out.
I had friends that I had confided in about my problems at home. They just kind of let me know how messed up the situation was that I was in and what am I going to do next.
Around November 2014, an ex-girlfriend reaches out to Monty on social media. Her name is Christina Perez.
We had said hello to each other on Facebook. I think she may have asked, what my situation was, and probably told her, I was unhappy.
Monty and Christina do not meet in person, but continue to chat occasionally online until Shayna finds out.
So I came home from work one day, and Shayna asked me who this Christina girl was, and I was like, oh gosh, here we go.
Shayna thought that Christina was the enemy and was trying to take her man.
She was mad about this situation that she thought was going on, so I am accused of having an affair with Christina.
The situation escalates when Shayna tracks down Christina's home and her place of work.
She's showing up at Christina's job, sitting outside, and it's getting more and more aggressive, their tone every day.
And then it blew up from there.
One day, when I got home from work, they were talking to each other, and I could hear Christina on speakerphone saying, I know what you did to my car, and I'm calling the police. Shayna had slashed Christina's tires. I'm blown away. Thinking to myself, who is this person?
She was slashing this woman's tires. She was following this woman. She was doing all these crazy things to this woman who had dated her husband 5 years ago.
I couldn't believe it. It first started out, with Shayna acting out in public and then escalating to slashing someone's tires. What's next? At that point, I knew that Shayna was crazy.
After the tire slashing, it's just getting worse and worse each day. They're making threats towards each other at this point.
Christina doesn't retaliate, and Monty stops contacting her. But things come to a head when Shayna decides to file a protective order against Christina.
We go to the courthouse. I'm with her, me and my daughter. We're sitting in the lobby just waiting. I looked down the hallway and saw Christina.
By chance, Christina is at the courthouse as well to file a protective order against Shayna.
And of course, they gave each other mean looks. And the next thing I know, they're walking towards each other. And my wife is holding my daughter. And they wanted to exchange words with each other. And then they swung at each other. As soon as they throw punches at each other, I'm grabbing my daughter out of harm's way. My daughter's crying. It was quite intense. The deputies came out and separated everybody. They took them back in the holding areas until they figure out what happened.
And thank goodness there was tape. So the deputies pull it, and of course they see Christina is innocent, that Shayna has purposefully knocked into this woman and then starts screaming about Christina attacking her.
They realized that the child had been endangered in this encounter. So my wife was charged with child endangerment.
Shayna is put on probation for a year, and Christina is granted a protective order against her.
I did feel trapped in this, I'm not gonna call it a marriage anymore. I felt trapped in this situation. But because my daughter's involved in this, and I can't just take off.
Monty doesn't hear from Christina again. Meantime, out of the blue, a few months later, Monty gets a message from another girlfriend from his past, Tabitha Lynch, his first love.
She had contacted me through Facebook and said, hey, how's it going? We chatted a little bit and then exchanged a number to talk. Her contacting me was kind of like a breath of fresh air. It was nice to hear from her and, see how she was doing in her life.
It's been over 20 years since Monty and Tabitha dated each other. Tabitha is divorced with 2 children of her own.
I didn't know all the details going on in her life at this time, but she just, told me that she had kids and they were doing good. And once she found out that I was having problems with my wife, she's like, I'd like to reach out to her and talk to her. I just didn't think it was a good idea. I didn't know what to expect from Shayna. I was like, no, it's okay. I got this under control. I'm gonna handle it my way. But one day after returning home from work, I walked to the door, and Shayna was upset. She's like, Tabitha has reached out to me and said that you and her have been talking and that I'm a terrible mom and a terrible wife. And so she asked me, who's this bitch?
Shayna was very angry because she felt that Tabitha was a threat.
She can't stop victimizing people. I would say she is one of the most bizarre people I've ever covered in 31 years of covering crime.
Shayna was very jealous, very vindictive, very evil.
Shayna Smith is enraged when she receives a warning message from her husband Monty's former girlfriend, Tabitha Lynch.
Tabitha did send a message to Shayna, basically telling her that, you know, she's losing the best thing that she could ever have, and she needs to change her ways before she screws it up.
Shayna took that as disrespect and did not like what she heard because it's coming from another woman. And she asked me, are y'all messing around? And I said, no.
Shayna is determined to have it out with Tabitha face to face, but she can't seem to locate her.
She's constantly asking me where to find her at. I said, I don't know. I was kind of worried about these two women having the interaction with each other because I don't know what Shayna's capable of.
But Shayna never gets the chance to confront Tabitha because one day, Tabitha suddenly becomes critically ill.
Tabitha had started having some health issues, and eventually she went into the hospital and didn't make it out.
2 months after reconnecting with Monty, Tabitha dies unexpectedly from natural causes.
Tabitha was like a sister to me, so it hurt me deeply.
I was like, I can't believe it. It seemed like I just talked to her just the other day and everything was fine.
Monty consoles himself that at least she's out of harm's way from Shayna.
I told Shayna that Tabitha passed away. She acted cold and heartless. She didn't care. The next words out of her mouth were, well, good, that's what that bitch gets. My jaw hit the floor. I couldn't believe that. I just heard her say that about Tabitha's death. I was already emotionally removed. I was ready to be physically removed. I didn't want to know her anymore.
The viewing for Tabitha Lynch is held in April of 2015 at a funeral chapel in East Tulsa.
I was there Thursday afternoon, probably between 1 and 2 o'clock. It hurt my heart. It was like a member of my family had passed away.
As the viewing ends, the family is taking a break outside when a stranger slips inside, presumably to pay her last respects.
Tabitha's mother happens to see this woman who looks like she's going and actually reaching into the casket. Something seems odd. It's reported to other family members. That woman is now gone, but the family goes to inspect Tabitha's body, and clearly her body has been touched. She's got a straight, cut right from the top of her head, right close to the bridge of her nose.
Her hair's been cut, and then her pants have been pulled down, her outfit has been pulled down. Her shoes that were specially made just for her that were in her casket, they're now gone. Everybody, they're just in shock. You realize that some crazy woman has come in here and desecrated this body.
Here you've got just absolute pandemonium unfolding. It's just, you can't put into words how devastating that was for this victim's family to just see.
There is one thing that we always hold sacred in this country, and that is how you treat a person who's passed away. And this just violated every tenet of that for sure.
Tabitha's family place a call to the police.
This is never a call you ever get, ever. And it just gets crazier from there.
And so the officers at that time, when they got there, they see Tabitha, they see a disheveled body lying in a casket. They see that the makeup is messed up. They see that the incision on her face. And those are all really unusual things. Those are things that should not have happened and that the officers were shocked to see. It feels like the crime was a personal attack on this person. They start taking photographs, they start collecting evidence, looking around, looking at the body, making observations.
And down next to the casket, there's hair. Tabitha's hair has been cut, and there's some of the hair laying on the ground.
While police are processing the crime scene at the funeral home, another call is placed to dispatch from Tabitha's family, who are now at her apartment.
They learned that the suspect may possibly be at the apartment.
They're reporting, we think this person who was just down at the funeral home is over at our house, and we need to get somebody over here right now.
Hours earlier, Monty Smith receives a disturbing message from Shayna.
I opened it up and looked at it, and it was a picture of Tabitha in her casket. I was very shocked to see her with this picture. I didn't understand why. Why do you have this picture? You know, where did you get this from? And then she also said, that bitch looks ugly in her casket. I can't believe you're messing with her. I was confused. I didn't know what she meant by that.
Once Monty finds out what Shayna has done, his life will never be the same.
It's beyond me, you know, why she would do what she did.
I've seen a lot of strange cases in my 31 years, and this one takes the cake. So many twists and turns along the way, and then it became frightening and more bizarre. It just became crazy.
After receiving the pictures from Shayna, Monty Smith returns home to find her in a frenzied state.
Shayna says, take your daughter out of the car and grab her car seat too. After I took my daughter out, she drove off. That left me and my daughter sitting there. This was probably about 5:30 in the evening. Had no clue where she was going.
It's 7:30 p.m. when police arrive at Tabitha's apartment.
They meet a bunch of Tabitha's family outside in the parking lot. And at that point, Tabitha's family tells them, there's someone inside our apartment and we didn't invite her in.
It's a heightened level of tension for the family members. It's like, she's inside.
They learned that this woman had showed up at the door of Tabitha Lynch's apartment. She says, my name's Stephanie, and I'm here because something happened to your mother's makeup at the funeral home.
The woman claims she wanted a photo of Tabitha in order to fix her makeup.
And so she makes up this ruse to get inside the apartment, and at some point, the family kind of gets suspicious. So the police go inside the apartment, and what they find is this disheveled, jittery-looking woman who appears out of place. She doesn't seem like she belongs there.
Police search the suspect and discover incriminating evidence.
They find a knife and a box cutter in her pockets. They find some hair in her pocket. And so it was apparent to them at that point that this person was related to what had happened at the funeral home. A few of the family members recognized this girl who identified herself as Stephanie as actually Shayna Sims. And when they start talking to police officers, they tell them that Shayna is actually the wife of Monty Smith, and Monty is a longtime friend of Tabitha Lynch.
Monty is putting his daughter to bed when his phone rings.
It was Shayna. Her voice was shaky. She's telling me, come save her. Then the next thing, I heard voices in the background, and she was telling them to stop and let her go. And they said, no, you're not going anywhere. And I was like, who's that in the background? What are you talking about? And she said, I'm at your dead bitch's house. You can't be. What do you mean? So I got my daughter up and I drove to Tabitha's home. As I'm driving over there, I'm still trying to wrap my head around what all just happened. And then once I arrived there, it was already chaos at that point. They have Shayna in the police car. As soon as they open the car door, she's trying to tell me that she's being accused of messing with Tabitha's body and that they're saying that she's, stole some stuff from them. She did not. That's why I told them to close the door. I didn't want to hear anymore.
Police believe Shayna wanted to break into Tabitha's apartment to steal a personal item she could keep as a trophy. The next day, the Tulsa media seizes on the story.
We immediately went to the scene to try to figure out what on earth was happening. And just what we learned that day, nobody in their right mind would go into a funeral home and do these terrible things to someone who's already passed away. Because what threat are they at that point?
Shayna's act of desecration is so unusual that police are hard-pressed to find the correct laws with which to charge her.
They initially charged her with burglary because she had entered the apartment under false pretenses. They charged her with illegal dissection because that was essentially the closest thing they could find to coming up with that cut on Tabitha's face.
They told me what she was being charged with, and I'm blown away. 100% total shock.
That is a whole new level of crazy. It's way beyond anything that I could ever imagine someone doing.
It seems impossible, but things actually get crazier.
My sergeant came in and said, "Hey, I got a message from the funeral home that we need to go out and take a look at the body again." I grabbed one of my detective partners and my sergeant, and we went out there. So when we examined the body, we found that Tabitha's breasts had been crudely cut out of her body. We also noticed that one of her toes was missing. I had, at that point, worked hundreds of homicides as a crime scene detective, and I had not ever seen anything like this.
The investigators talk with Monty, who shows them the photographs that Shayna had texted him the previous day. They are the equivalent of a smoking gun.
So I see a hand holding a knife next to a toe. I recognize that as probably Tabitha's foot. And I see there's photographs of a hand next to what I assume to be Tabitha's genitalia. And I realize that I'm looking at photographs of Shayna in the act, committing these heinous acts at the funeral home.
I was disturbed, kind of, heartbroken. Couldn't believe that she did this to someone that I knew and that had passed away. A total disrespect.
How are you going to explain those photos? I mean, that just kind of seals her fate. Pictures of what she's actually doing.
When the case goes to trial in April 2016, Shayna is charged with 3 misdemeanors and 2 felonies.
A woman accused of slashing the body of her husband's former girlfriend is expected in court today.
This is a case that is revenge. This is the ex getting involved with her husband, and so she's going to do something about that.
I don't remember any emotion from Shayna. The defense had tried very early on in the process to say she wasn't competent to stand trial because she's got, mental issues, but she was given a thorough exam. That was part of her pre-trial process, and she was found competent to stand trial. The defense were like, look, she's just a woman pushed over the edge like any woman would be. Her husband's having an affair, the victim is texting her and rubbing her face in it. What else would a woman do?
The prosecution call a number of witnesses, including Monty.
Seeing Shayna in the courtroom and being asked questions, and she's staring at me, trying to intimidate me. I answer the questions and try to get through it.
And then the jury goes out. It's right before lunchtime. It's like 11:45 in the morning. And I didn't think it would take too long. So 3 hours later, almost to the minute, they called us back in the courtroom, and that's when the verdict was read.
They found her guilty of all the counts. All those counts were ordered to run consecutive. It all totaled up to 16 total years.
I guess you could say I felt a kind of peace.
Monty divorces Shayna a year later and gets full custody of their daughter.
I can't imagine, what he had to go through, what he had to tell his daughter, all the ramifications of that. That's tough.
Less than 4 years into Shayna's sentence, a new law is struck in Oklahoma that gives her a loophole to appeal.
Shayna Sims has been released from prison after serving 4 years of her sentence.
I was like, she can't be. There's no way. I couldn't believe it. I was in shock.
It was just a gut punch to everybody.
It was devastating to me when I found out. I felt rage at that point. I couldn't believe it.
In November 2021, Monty Smith's ex-wife Shayna Sims is set free, less than 4 years into a 16-year sentence for desecrating Tabitha Lynch's body.
I was like, she can't be. There's no way. But sure enough, I did get confirmation message later that day that she was released. I actually saw a video of her being released.
She just gets to walk. She spends a few years in prison for all the damage she's caused, and she gets to walk.
You couldn't ask for a more devastating blow to the victim's family.
It was a shock. It was really a kick in the gut that we learned that she was going to be walking free after we put this case together. And to have someone walking free was tough to swallow.
Shayna has been released on appeal as a result of a Supreme Court ruling known as the McGirt decision.
The McGirt decision, in essence, basically told Oklahoma if somebody was a Native American, either as a defendant or as a victim, that the state of Oklahoma had no jurisdiction to handle those prosecutions.
The United States Supreme Court said that the state of Oklahoma can't arrest Native Americans. Our prosecutors can't prosecute crimes involving Native Americans. And so that brought into question thousands and thousands of cases over the years where a Native American was either a victim or a suspect.
This new law is supposed to protect Native Americans.
But what did Shayna Sims do? She figured out that Tabitha had Native American blood in her. You can't prosecute me for this crime. And literally, she got her case dismissed because of that McGirt decision. Shayna Sims, somebody has zero Native American blood in her, gets the benefit of victimizing somebody who was a Native American and walks around as though she's got no consequences. It's just so upsetting.
Once Shayna is out of jail, she can't seem to stay out of trouble.
Monty was worried about what she might do. Of course, the victim's family, Tabitha's family, was really worried and stressed about what she might do or who she might target. She gets arrested for stealing a car, then gets in trouble for assaulting her mother. It's just one thing after another. Monty's big concern was protecting his daughter, because now that she's free, what would stop her from trying to get custody?
I got a phone call from Shayna wanting to speak with her daughter. I did not know, I couldn't believe it. I was in shock. I ignored it for the first few days. She kept calling.
He didn't know what her plans were or what she was capable of doing now that she's out of jail.
Monty talks with their daughter, who tells him she wants to meet her mother. He drops her off for a weekend at her grandmother's house, where Shayna is staying.
Thought to myself, give it a try just one time to see how it goes. Shayna and her mom, they were yelling at each other and having confrontation in front of my daughter when she's not used to seeing that. And she told me herself that she didn't want to be around that, and she didn't want to see them. So I did not force her at that point to go back anymore. And that's where we are to this current day.
Monty still has full custody of his daughter. So yes, he, was doing his best to keep his daughter safe, to keep Shayna away.
Despite being warned about not going anywhere near Tabitha's relatives, Shayna defies the order.
And then, sure enough, Shayna then goes to the victim's family's apartment, and she's like, oh, I wasn't there to see them, which is a lie. You're only there to harass that poor family who's already been through so much. All you have to do to stay out of jail is stay over in your county. But she can't help herself again. She comes over here, and of course, that puts the family in terror. They are afraid of why she keeps showing up there and what she might do. And so, of course, yes, she's arrested and put back in.
Recognizing that Shayna is still a threat, Oklahoma state prosecutors file an appeal.
We had another case. It was called Castro Huerta, which was somebody who was clearly not a Native American, who had victimized children who were Native American. And we took that fact pattern back up to the United States Supreme Court and asked them to revisit, in essence, the McGirt decision. So then we immediately took that decision, petitioned the court, got her dismissal set aside, and remanded Shayna Sims back to prison, which is where she's at today.
In February 2023, Shayna's sentence and conviction are reinstated, and she is sent back to prison to serve the remaining 12 years.
So it's definitely a relief, for all of us that she's back in jail. Me personally, I don't think 16 years is long enough.
I'm at peace in my life. My daughter's at peace. She's happy. I've never let this be a problem for her.
Monty has this smile that whenever he's in good spirits, and it shows. He just glows. And I love to see my brother when he's happy and when everything is going good.
I feel like after all this is said and done, it's like looking at the damage after.
The night doesn't begin with violence. It never does. It begins with laughter, thin, careless laughter that drifts across dark water like something fragile enough to disappear if you listen too closely. Midnight is approaching in the Marlborough Sounds, and the world feels suspended between one year and the next. Boats, dozens of them, float lazily in the black, glassy water. Their masts sway like quiet metronomes against a sky scattered with cold, distant stars. Music leaks out in uneven bursts from different directions, colliding mid-air with shouts, cheers, and the dull clink of bottles knocking together. Somewhere, someone counts down too early. Somewhere else, someone has already forgotten what they were celebrating. The sea carries everything. Every voice. Every secret. And in the middle of it all, there is a moment, a small, almost invisible moment, that will fracture into something permanent. Two figures step away from the safety of the crowd. At first, no one notices. Why would they? It's New Year's Eve. People come and go constantly, slipping between boats, chasing music, chasing friends, chasing the restless promise that something better might be waiting just a few meters away. Movement is part of the night's rhythm. Leaving is normal. But this leaving is different. A young woman, 17, her laughter still lingering from something someone said minutes earlier. A young man, 21, steady but relaxed, carrying that quiet sense of responsibility that comes from being just a little older, just a little more aware. They hesitate for a second at the edge of the boat, the kind of hesitation that feels like nothing at the time but will later be replayed again and again in the minds of those who wish they had noticed. There is another man with them. Not part of the group. Not someone everyone recognizes. Just a presence, quiet, unremarkable, almost blending into the dim chaos of the night. He gestures toward a smaller boat nearby. White hull. Low in the water. Easy to miss unless you were looking directly at it. And no one is really looking. Because at that exact moment, somewhere behind them, someone shouts that it's midnight. Fireworks begin to bloom in the distance, brief explosions of color reflected across the dark surface of the bay. Cheers erupt. Arms go up. Bottles spill. Music surges louder, swallowing the edges of everything else. The world tilts toward celebration. And the three figures step into shadow. The small boat shifts slightly as weight transfers onto it. A dull creak. The soft slap of water against fiberglass. The rope loosens, barely audible beneath the chaos. For a second, just 1 second, the young woman turns her head, as if she might look back. But she doesn't. Or if she does, no one remembers. The boat drifts away. Not fast. Not dramatically. Just enough to separate itself from the cluster of light and noise. Just enough to become another silhouette among many. The kind your eyes slide past without ever settling on. Within minutes, it is gone. And the night closes over it like it was never there. Hours later, the celebration begins to dissolve. Music fades into static. Conversations blur into tired murmurs. People collapse into cabins or stretch out wherever they can find space. The air grows colder, sharper, carrying the faint metallic smell of the sea as dawn inches closer. Someone asks, casually at first, if anyone has seen them. It's not concern yet. Just curiosity. Maybe they went to another boat. Maybe they found friends. Maybe they're asleep somewhere. It's New Year's. People disappear all the time. But then the question is asked again. And again. Each time, it lands a little heavier. Because no one has an answer. Memory becomes unreliable in the early hours of the morning. Faces blur. Timelines stretch and collapse. People try to reconstruct the night in fragments, half-finished sentences, vague gestures, uncertain recollections. I think I saw them. They were with someone. A guy, maybe. What did he look like? And that's where everything begins to fracture. Descriptions don't match. Details shift. Someone insists the boat was larger. Someone else swears it was small. One person remembers a beard. Another is certain there wasn't one. Voices overlap, contradict, fade. But one image persists, stubborn and incomplete. A small white boat. A stranger. And the last time anyone saw them alive. By sunrise, the mood has changed. The water no longer feels like a place of celebration. It feels vast. Indifferent. Too large to search, too deep to understand. The same surface that reflected fireworks hours earlier now lies flat and empty, offering nothing back. Their absence becomes something physical. A weight pressing into every conversation, every glance exchanged between those who were there. The kind of absence that grows louder the longer it goes unanswered. Because people don't just vanish. Not like this. Not without leaving something behind. But the sea keeps its silence. Days pass. Then weeks. Searches begin, first hopeful, then methodical, then desperate. Boats sweep across the sounds in slow, deliberate patterns. Divers descend into cold, dark water where visibility collapses within meters. Helicopters trace lines in the sky, scanning for anything that doesn't belong. Nothing. No wreckage. No clothing. No trace. It is as if the night itself swallowed them whole. And yet, the story refuses to disappear. Because of the man. The one who stood just slightly apart. The one whose face no one can quite agree on, but whose presence lingers like a shadow burned into memory. He becomes the center of everything. Who was he? Why were they with him? Where did he take them? Questions stack on top of each other, each one heavier than the last. Investigators begin to pull at threads, thin, fragile threads that might unravel into something solid. A name emerges. At first, it's just a possibility. One among many. But it doesn't stay that way for long. Because as more pieces are gathered, testimonies, sightings, inconsistencies, the shape of a narrative begins to form. Not a complete one. Not a clean one. But something tangible enough to pursue. And once a narrative takes hold, it is difficult to let go. Especially when there is nothing else. No bodies. No crime scene in the traditional sense. Only absence. And the echo of a decision made in the early hours of a new year. The case becomes a paradox. A story built on what isn't there. A crime defined by the void it leaves behind. Every theory must stretch across that emptiness, trying to bridge the gap between what is known and what can never be fully proven. And in that gap, doubt begins to live. Because the more people look, the less certain everything becomes. Witnesses question their own memories. Investigators revisit assumptions. Journalists dig deeper, uncovering details that don't quite fit, angles that don't quite align. The narrative shifts, subtly at first, then more noticeably. Was the right man identified? Were the right conclusions drawn? Or did the urgency to find answers create something that only resembles the truth? The questions linger for years. They don't fade with time. They sharpen. Because this isn't just a story about what happened. It's a story about what might have happened. About the fragile line between certainty and belief. About how a single night, one decision, one encounter can ripple outward, touching lives in ways no one could have imagined. Somewhere in that darkness, between the last laugh and the first moment of fear, something irreversible took place. But no one saw it. No one heard it. And no one can say, with absolute certainty, exactly how it unfolded. All that remains is the silence that followed. And the image of a small white boat drifting away into the night, carrying with it a mystery that refuses to be buried. Before that night fractured into something people would spend decades trying to reconstruct, the Marlborough Sounds existed as a place that felt almost too peaceful to hold violence. It is the kind of landscape that convinces you nothing truly bad could happen there. Jagged peninsulas stretch out like sleeping animals, their backs covered in dense green bush that rolls down into quiet coves. The water is dark but calm, sheltered from the open ocean, a maze of inlets and channels that seem to fold in on themselves. From above, it looks intricate and beautiful. From within, especially at night, it can feel isolating in a way that's harder to explain. During the day, the sounds are alive with movement that feels harmless. Small boats cut through the water, leaving thin white wakes that disappear almost as quickly as they form. Fishermen drift slowly, rods resting in their hands as if time itself has slowed to match the rhythm of the tide. Families gather on decks, children leaning over railings, watching the water as if something magical might surface at any moment. The air smells clean, touched by salt and vegetation, and the light reflects off the surface in a way that makes everything seem brighter than it really is. But at night, the same place changes its character. The shapes of the land become silhouettes. The dense bush turns into a wall of darkness that presses in from every direction. Sound travels differently, voices carry farther, echoes bounce unpredictably across the water, and the absence of city noise creates a kind of vacuum where even small sounds feel amplified. A dropped bottle, a laugh, the creak of a rope, each one lingers longer than it should. On New Year's Eve, that contrast becomes even sharper. For years, young people had made their way into the sounds to celebrate the turning of the year. Boats would gather in clusters, anchored close enough for people to move between them but far enough apart to create pockets of separate energy. Some boats played loud music, others hosted quieter gatherings where conversations stretched into the early hours. There was a sense of freedom that came with being out there, removed from land, removed from rules that felt more rigid elsewhere. It was a floating party, but not an organized one. No central authority, no structure. Just a loose convergence of people drawn by the same idea, that this was the place to be when one year ended and another began. By the time December 31st, 1997 arrived, that tradition had already settled into something familiar. Word spread easily, through friends, through small communities, through the kind of informal networks that didn't need invitations. If you had access to a boat, or knew someone who did, you could be part of it. That year, the weather held steady. Not perfect, but good enough. The kind of conditions that wouldn't deter anyone who had already decided to go. The air carried a mild chill, enough to remind people it was still summer's edge rather than its peak. The sky, clear enough for stars, offered no warning of anything unusual. Boats began arriving long before nightfall. Some anchored early, claiming positions that would later become crowded. Others drifted in closer to midnight, navigating between silhouettes with practiced ease. By evening, the water was dotted with vessels of different sizes, sleek yachts, modest cabin cruisers, small dinghies tied off to larger boats. Lights flickered on as darkness settled, each one reflecting off the surface and multiplying until the bay seemed filled with scattered constellations. Music started in fragments, then built into something layered and chaotic. Different rhythms overlapped, clashed, then dissolved into one another. Voices rose above it all, sometimes in conversation, sometimes in shouts that had no real purpose other than to be heard. It was not a controlled environment. And that was part of its appeal. People moved freely between boats, stepping across narrow gaps, grabbing onto railings, laughing when they stumbled slightly as the vessels shifted beneath them. Drinks were passed from hand to hand. Names were exchanged, then forgotten, then replaced by new ones minutes later. It was the kind of night where identities blurred, where being known mattered less than being present. In that setting, strangers didn't feel threatening. They felt expected. A new face was just another part of the experience. Someone to talk to share a drink with, to spend a few minutes or a few hours alongside before drifting apart again. There was an unspoken trust that came with the environment, a belief that everyone there was part of the same temporary community. That belief would later become one of the most unsettling aspects of what followed. Because it meant that no one was watching as closely as they might have in a different place. No one was tracking who arrived with whom, who left with whom, or who lingered at the edges of conversations without fully joining them. The constant movement created a kind of anonymity that was both freeing and dangerous. And beneath all of it, the geography of the sounds added another layer. The water was not just a backdrop. It was a barrier. Once a boat moved away from the cluster, it could disappear quickly into darkness. There were no streetlights to follow, no roads to trace, no easy way to track movement once it slipped beyond the immediate circle of visibility. The land offered countless hiding places, small coves, narrow inlets, stretches of shoreline that could not be seen from the main gathering point. It was beautiful. And it was isolating. For those who grew up around the sounds, this dual nature was understood, even if not always consciously acknowledged. The water could be calm and inviting, but it demanded respect. It could carry you effortlessly, but it could also separate you from everything familiar in a matter of minutes. On that night, however, most people weren't thinking about that. They were thinking about the countdown. About the next drink. About the person standing next to them. About the small, immediate moments that felt important at the time. Among the crowd were two individuals whose lives had followed very different paths to bring them to that same place. One, younger, still standing at the edge of adulthood, where everything feels open and undefined. The other, slightly older, with a sense of direction that comes from having already stepped into that next phase, even if only briefly. They were not out of place there. They were exactly where they were supposed to be. Surrounded by people, by noise, by light. Wrapped in the kind of atmosphere that makes the future feel distant and the present feel endless. And somewhere within that same environment, there was another presence. Not distinct. Not immediately noticeable. Just another person moving through the same spaces, hearing the same music, seeing the same lights reflected on the water. Someone who, at that moment, existed within the same unspoken trust that defined the night. No alarms were raised. No instincts triggered. Because nothing, on the surface, suggested that anything was wrong. That is what makes the setting so important to understand. It wasn't just a location. It was a condition. A combination of isolation, movement, and shared assumption that created the perfect environment for something to go unnoticed. For a moment to slip past without being recognized for what it was. For a decision, small, almost insignificant in the moment, to unfold into something irreversible. As the night deepened, the energy shifted in subtle ways. Early excitement gave way to a looser, more chaotic rhythm. Conversations became less coherent. Movements less steady. The line between intention and impulse blurred. Midnight approached, carrying with it the weight of expectation. People began to gather more tightly, clustering on decks, turning their attention outward toward the open water where fireworks would soon appear. The noise built toward a peak, voices rising, music swelling, anticipation sharpening every sensation. And then, in the middle of all that focus, all that attention directed toward the horizon, something happened just outside of it. Not hidden. Not concealed. Just unobserved. Because everyone was looking somewhere else. The Marlborough Sounds, in that moment, held two realities at once. One, loud and visible, filled with celebration and light. The other, quieter, slipping into darkness just beyond the edge of awareness. And it is within that second reality that the story truly begins to take shape. A place that felt safe. A night that felt ordinary. A setting that offered both connection and concealment in equal measure. All of it converging into a single point in time where the difference between being seen and being forgotten could be measured in seconds. And no one, not then, could have known which side of that line they were standing on. Before they became names repeated in headlines, before their faces were printed in newspapers and carried in the careful hands of families who refused to let them fade into abstraction, they were simply two young people standing at the threshold of their own lives, moving forward in ways that felt ordinary, even predictable. Ben Smart was the kind of presence that didn't demand attention but held it anyway. At 21, he had already begun shaping himself into someone others relied on without needing to say it out loud. There was a steadiness to him, something grounded that came not from rigidity but from a quiet understanding of responsibility. People who knew him would later struggle to explain it precisely, resorting to fragments instead of definitions. The way he listened more than he spoke. The way he stepped in without hesitation when something needed to be done. The way he carried himself as though he had already accepted the idea that life required effort, patience, and a willingness to show up even when it wasn't easy. He had grown up in a place where the rhythm of life was tied closely to the land and the water, where independence wasn't something you announced but something you practiced daily. Those early experiences had shaped him into someone capable, someone who didn't panic easily, someone who could adapt when things shifted unexpectedly. He wasn't reckless, but he wasn't overly cautious either. He existed somewhere in the middle, where confidence met awareness. Friends remembered his humor as understated, the kind that surfaced at just the right moment rather than dominating every conversation. He didn't need to be the loudest person in the room to feel present. Instead, he created space for others, drawing people in with a sense of ease that made them feel comfortable without fully understanding why. There was also a forward momentum in his life at that point. Plans forming, paths beginning to take shape. Nothing rigid, nothing locked in, but enough to suggest direction. He wasn't drifting. He was moving, even if he didn't yet know exactly where that movement would lead. Olivia Hope, at 17, carried a different kind of energy. Where Ben's presence was steady, Olivia's was bright and immediate. She occupied space with a kind of natural openness, the kind that made people feel seen the moment they spoke to her. There was a warmth in her interactions that didn't feel forced, a genuine curiosity about the people around her and the world she was just beginning to explore more independently. She stood at that fragile, electric point between adolescence and adulthood, where everything feels both possible and uncertain at the same time. The future wasn't something distant for her. It was something approaching quickly, something she was beginning to reach toward with a mix of excitement and hesitation. Those who knew her often spoke about her smile, not in a vague or sentimental way, but in specific terms. It wasn't just that she smiled often. It was how quickly it appeared, how easily it spread into laughter, how it seemed to invite others into the same moment. It was expressive, unguarded, and real. She had plans too, though they were still forming, still flexible. At 17, life hadn't yet narrowed into a single path. There were possibilities branching out in multiple directions, each one carrying its own version of who she might become. That openness gave her a sense of lightness, but also a quiet urgency. There was so much ahead, and she was just beginning to step into it. Her relationships reflected that same openness. Friendships that felt intense and immediate, connections built quickly and sincerely. She trusted easily, not out of naivety, but because the world she had known so far had given her little reason not to. That trust would later be examined, questioned, dissected by people trying to understand how something like this could happen. But in the context of her life as it was then, it made perfect sense. She was not reckless. She was alive in the way young people often are, leaning into experience, into connection, into the simple act of being present in a moment without constantly calculating its risks. Their paths crossed naturally. They moved within overlapping circles, connected through friends, through shared environments, through the kind of social networks that form easily in smaller communities. There was nothing unusual about them being in the same place at the same time on that night. In fact, it would have been more surprising if they hadn't been. What mattered was not just who they were individually, but how they existed within the world around them. Ben, with his quiet steadiness, often became a point of reassurance for those nearby. Not in an overt way, but in subtle actions. Walking someone back to where they needed to be. Staying a little longer to make sure everyone was accounted for. taking on small responsibilities without making them seem like burdens. Olivia, with her openness and energy, brought a different kind of presence. She connected people. She bridged gaps in conversations. She made environments feel warmer, more inclusive, more alive. Together, even if only for that night, they represented a balance that felt natural. One grounded, one expansive. One watching carefully, the other experiencing fully. As New Year's Eve approached, neither of them would have had any reason to believe that the night would be anything other than what it had always been for so many others before them. A celebration. A gathering. A moment suspended between what had been and what was about to begin. They prepared for it in ordinary ways. Clothes chosen without overthinking. Conversations about who would be there, what the night might hold. The kind of casual anticipation that builds without pressure, without expectation of anything beyond enjoyment. For Olivia, there was likely a sense of excitement that carried a slightly sharper edge. 17, on the cusp of adulthood, stepping into a space that felt just a little more grown-up, a little more independent. The idea of being out on the water, among older friends, among new people, would have held a certain appeal. For Ben, the night may have felt more familiar. Not routine, but recognizable. Another gathering, another chance to spend time with people he knew, to relax in an environment that didn't demand too much from him. Neither of them were entering the night with caution heightened. Neither of them were anticipating danger. Because nothing in their experiences had prepared them for it. That is one of the most difficult aspects to reconcile when looking back. There were no obvious warning signs in their lives leading up to that moment. No patterns of risk that would make their presence in that setting seem unusual or ill-advised. They were not outliers. They were participants in something that many others had experienced without consequence. Their families would later hold on to these details, not as evidence, but as anchors. Proof of who they were beyond the narrative that would come to define them. They would speak of routines, of small habits, of conversations that seemed insignificant at the time but became invaluable in hindsight. The last ordinary moments. A conversation before leaving. A glance. A simple goodbye that carried no weight because it wasn't expected to be the last. Those moments would later expand in memory, examined from every angle, replayed in an attempt to find anything that might have hinted at what was coming. But there was nothing. Just two young people stepping into a night that promised celebration. As the hours passed and the gathering in the Marlborough Sounds grew, they moved within it like everyone else. Talking, laughing, shifting from one group to another. Existing fully within the present, not yet aware that time was already narrowing around them. People would later try to remember specific interactions. What was said. Who they spoke to. Where they stood. But memory is not precise, especially in environments filled with movement and noise. Details blurred, timelines overlapped, certainty dissolved into approximation. What remained consistent was the sense that they were part of the night, not separate from it. Visible. Present. Alive in the same way as everyone around them. And then, at some point, that visibility ended. Not abruptly, not in a way that drew immediate attention, but gradually. A shift from being seen to being assumed elsewhere. From being present to being unaccounted for. It is that transition that defines their story. Not just who they were, but how they disappeared. Because understanding the loss requires understanding the life that existed before it. Ben Smart was not just a victim. He was a young man moving forward, carrying with him the weight and promise of adulthood, grounded in a way that made others feel secure. Olivia Hope was not just a name attached to a case. She was a young woman stepping into her future, open and bright, connected to the world in a way that made it feel expansive and full of possibility. Their stories did not begin in darkness. They began in light. In ordinary days and simple moments that held no hint of what was to come. And that is what makes what follows so difficult to accept. Because when they stepped onto that boat, when they moved toward that final, unobserved moment, they were not stepping away from troubled lives or dangerous paths. They were stepping out of something entirely normal. And into something that would erase them from it. Midnight does not arrive quietly in the Marlborough Sounds. It surges in, carried on voices, on anticipation, on the collective need to mark the passing of time with something louder than the thoughts people have been avoiding all year. In the final seconds before the year turns, the entire bay seems to lean forward, as if even the water itself is waiting. Then it breaks. Shouts tear through the air, overlapping, chaotic, joyful. Fireworks ignite somewhere beyond the cluster of boats, streaking upward before exploding into brief, violent blooms of color. Red fractures into gold, gold dissolves into white, and for a few seconds at a time, the darkness is pushed back just enough to reveal fragments of faces, raised arms, open mouths frozen mid-cheer. The reflections ripple across the water, distorting with every movement of the boats. Light stretches, bends, disappears. It is beautiful, but unstable. Nothing holds its shape for long. On one of those boats, surrounded by that surge of energy, Ben Smart and Olivia Hope are still part of everything. They are not isolated. Not yet. Olivia is caught in the brightness of the moment, her face lit in flashes as fireworks burst overhead. She leans into conversations, her laughter quick and unrestrained, her attention shifting easily from one person to another. There is no sense of urgency in her movements, no indication that time is narrowing. She is exactly where she wants to be, exactly who she has been all night, open, present, alive in the rhythm of the celebration. Ben stands close enough to remain aware of her, not hovering, not controlling, but attentive in the way that has become natural to him. He speaks with others, exchanges words that are likely already dissolving into the noise, but his awareness extends beyond his immediate conversation. He notices small things. Who is nearby? Who is moving away? Who might need help navigating the shifting space between boats? Around them, the party continues to swell. People move more freely now, loosened by alcohol, by excitement, by the symbolic permission that midnight seems to grant. Boundaries blur further. Strangers become temporary companions. Conversations begin and end without structure. Someone dances on a narrow section of deck, barely maintaining balance but laughing too hard to care. Another group leans over the side, watching the water as if expecting it to respond to the chaos above. It is within this heightened, unstable energy that the first subtle shift occurs. Not dramatic. Not noticeable to most. Just a slight change in direction. Olivia and Ben begin to separate from the center of the gathering, not abruptly, but gradually. A step here, a shift there, guided by the natural flow of movement. Someone suggests something, another boat, another group, another place where the night might continue in a slightly different way. The suggestion does not feel unusual. It fits the pattern of the night. They follow it. The man appears within this transition. Later, people will try to place him more precisely, to anchor him to a specific moment, a specific interaction. But in reality, he emerges the way many things do that night, out of the blur, out of the overlap of faces and voices. He is not introduced formally. There is no clear beginning to his presence. He is simply there. Standing close enough to be part of the conversation, but not so central that he draws immediate attention. His demeanor is calm, controlled in a way that contrasts slightly with the surrounding chaos. He does not need to raise his voice to be heard. He does not compete with the noise. Instead, he seems to operate just beneath it, speaking in a way that requires others to lean in slightly, to focus. There is nothing overtly alarming about him. If anything, his composure might even feel reassuring in that environment. He suggests moving to another boat. Not far. Just nearby. Something smaller, quieter. A place to continue the night without the crush of bodies and the overwhelming noise. It is a simple proposition. One that fits perfectly within the logic of the moment. Olivia responds first, her curiosity aligning naturally with the idea. A new space, a new conversation, a continuation of the night in a different setting. There is no hesitation in her agreement, no visible calculation of risk. The suggestion feels like an extension of everything she has already been doing. Ben's response is more measured, but not resistant. He looks toward the direction indicated, assessing without fully disengaging from the flow of the night. The boat is visible, though only partially. A white hull, low and unobtrusive, rocking gently in the water. It is close enough to reach without difficulty. Others are moving between boats as well. Nothing about this movement stands out. For a brief moment, there is a pause. Not long enough to register as doubt, but long enough to exist. A space where a different decision could have been made. Where staying might have felt just as natural as leaving. Then it passes. They move. The transition from one boat to another is slightly awkward, as it always is. The gap between them shifts with the water, widening and narrowing unpredictably. Hands reach out to steady themselves, to guide, to ensure balance. There is a brief contact, skin against skin, fabric brushing against fingers, as Olivia steps across, followed by Ben. The man moves with familiarity, as if he has done this many times before. Once aboard, the difference in atmosphere is immediate. The noise from the larger gathering fades, not completely, but enough to create a sense of separation. The music becomes distant, the voices indistinct. The small boat feels contained, enclosed in a way that contrasts sharply with the openness of the larger one. The light is dimmer here. Shadows stretch further. The water feels closer. For a moment, it might even feel like relief. A break from the intensity. A chance to breathe. But there is also something else, something less defined. An awareness, perhaps, that the environment has changed in a more fundamental way. That the safety created by numbers, by visibility, by shared presence, has been replaced by something quieter, more isolated. If Olivia feels it, she does not show it. She continues to engage, to speak, to exist within the moment as she has all night. Her voice carries softly in the smaller space, her laughter less explosive but still present. Ben remains attentive, his awareness adjusting to the new setting. He takes in the details, the layout of the boat, the position relative to the others, the distance that has already begun to form. The man moves with purpose. Not rushed. Not hesitant. He unties the line. The rope slips free with a soft, almost inaudible release. The boat shifts slightly, responding immediately to the change. The connection to the larger vessel is gone. For a second, the movement is minimal. Then the separation begins. The small boat drifts, carried by a combination of current and subtle steering. The distance between it and the cluster of lights increases gradually, almost imperceptibly at first. The noise continues to fade, replaced by the softer sounds of water against the hull, the occasional creak of wood or metal adjusting to movement. From the larger boats, the departure is easy to miss. There is too much happening. Too many people moving in different directions. Too much focus on the celebration that is still unfolding. If anyone sees them leave, it does not register as significant. Just another group heading elsewhere. Just another small shift in a night defined by constant motion. On the small boat, the world feels different now. The lights behind them grow dimmer, their reflections stretching thinner across the water before breaking apart entirely. The darkness ahead is deeper, less interrupted. The shapes of the land loom closer, though still indistinct. Time begins to behave differently. Moments stretch. Silences linger. The conversation, whatever it is, continues, but it exists within a space that feels increasingly removed from everything else. This is the point where certainty ends. Where the known sequence of events dissolves into speculation. What is said? What is felt? What is understood in those final moments of shared presence? None of it is recorded. None of it can be confirmed. What remains is the image. A small white boat moving away from a cluster of light into a darkness that offers no reflection, no detail, no return. 3 figures aboard. 1 guiding. 2 following. The distance grows. The connection fades. And somewhere between the last visible light and the first complete absence, something changes. Not necessarily in a single, dramatic instant. But in a series of moments that cannot be reconstructed. Moments where intention, perception, and reality may have shifted in ways no one else could witness. The Marlborough sounds, so open and expansive during the day, become something else entirely in that context. A place where movement can erase presence. Where distance can be created without resistance. Where a single decision to leave one space for another can carry consequences that extend far beyond what anyone could have anticipated. By the time the boat is no longer visible, the night behind it continues as if nothing has changed. The celebration persists. The noise rises and falls. People laugh, drink, talk, unaware that the balance of the night has already been altered. Because the moment that mattered most did not announce itself. It did not interrupt. It did not demand attention. It simply happened. And then it was gone. Morning arrives slowly over the Marlborough Sounds, not with a sharp break but with a gradual thinning of darkness, as if the night is reluctant to release its hold. The water shifts first, losing its deep blackness and taking on a muted grey-blue tone that reflects the sky before the sun fully rises. The air feels colder now, cleaner, carrying away the stale mixture of alcohol, sweat, and smoke that hung low over the boats just hours earlier. What remains is aftermath. Not the kind that suggests tragedy, at least not immediately, but the familiar residue of celebration. Empty bottles roll gently along decks with the motion of the water. Stray jackets lie abandoned where they were dropped. Someone stirs in a corner, groaning softly, pulling themselves back into consciousness one uncomfortable inch at a time. Conversations begin again, slower now, fragmented, punctuated by pauses as memories struggle to reassemble themselves. At first, everything feels normal. Disjointed, but normal. People begin asking the usual questions. Who stayed where? Who left early? Who ended up on which boat? Names are exchanged, sometimes correctly, sometimes not. Laughter returns in small bursts as stories begin to form half-true recollections of things that seemed hilarious in the moment and now feel slightly absurd in daylight. It is within this routine that the first gap appears. It doesn't announce itself as a problem. It's just a question. Has anyone seen Olivia? The tone is casual, almost absent-minded. The kind of question asked while scanning a group, expecting the answer to appear visually before anyone even responds. A quick look across the deck, a glance toward the nearby boats. No immediate answer. That isn't unusual. People are scattered. Someone shrugs, suggests she might be on another boat, maybe sleeping, maybe still talking somewhere out of sight. The explanation is accepted easily, folded into the ongoing effort to reconstruct the night. A few minutes later, the question surfaces again. This time, it carries a little more weight. What about Ben? The same process repeats. Scanning. Pausing. Assuming. Someone thinks they saw him earlier. Someone else isn't sure. Another voice suggests he left with Olivia. That part, at least, begins to settle into something more consistent. Yes, they were together. Yes, they left at some point. But with who? The question lingers longer. Conversations begin to slow as attention shifts more deliberately. People start to piece together fragments with greater focus, leaning into memory instead of letting it drift. I think they got on a boat. What kind of boat? Small, I think. White. Whose boat? Silence. The first real fracture forms in that silence. Because no one knows. Or rather, no one knows with certainty. The details are there, but they don't align cleanly. One person remembers standing close enough to see them step across. Another recalls only catching a glimpse of movement out of the corner of their eye. Someone else insists they spoke to Olivia just before she left, but can't recall exactly what was said. The man becomes part of the conversation. Not immediately defined, but present in the recollections. There was a guy with them. What did he look like? The answers come hesitantly. Dark hair, maybe. Or light, I'm not sure. He had a boat. That's not helpful. A few uneasy laughs break the tension, but they don't last. Because the lack of clarity is becoming harder to ignore. People begin moving between boats, no longer for the sake of socializing but to check, to confirm, to eliminate possibilities. Names are called out across the water, voices carrying farther in the stillness of the morning. Heads turn, responses come back, but none of them bring the answers they are looking for. Olivia isn't there. Ben isn't there. The small white boat is gone. At first, the assumption remains grounded in normalcy. Maybe they left early. Maybe they went ashore. Maybe they found another group further out. All reasonable. All possible. But as time stretches, those possibilities begin to thin. Because leaving without telling anyone begins to feel less likely. Not impossible, but inconsistent with what people remember of them. Ben, especially, doesn't fit that pattern. He is not someone who disappears without explanation. That detail settles uneasily into the growing concern. By mid-morning, the mood has shifted noticeably. The easy rhythm of recovery is gone, replaced by something tighter, more focused. Conversations are no longer casual. They are deliberate, repetitive, circling the same points in an effort to extract something more concrete. When was the last time anyone saw them? Who was closest? Who spoke to them last? Answers come, but they do not align perfectly. Time becomes unreliable. Midnight blurs into the early hours. 10 minutes feels like an hour. An hour collapses into something shorter. People begin to question their own recollections, correcting themselves mid-sentence, retracting statements, offering alternatives. The image of the boat becomes clearer, but only in isolation. Small. White. A ketch, someone suggests, though not everyone agrees on the detail. The shape is remembered more than the specifics. A mast. A low profile. Something that did not stand out among the others until it was already gone. The man remains indistinct. His presence is confirmed, but his identity is not. That absence of identity begins to feel significant. Because everything else, however fragmented, points toward him. By early afternoon, the possibility that something is wrong begins to settle into something more concrete. Concern becomes urgency. Calls are made. People reach out beyond the immediate group, contacting others who might have seen something, heard something, noticed something that now feels important. Descriptions are shared, repeated, refined. The small white boat becomes the focal point, the single consistent element in an otherwise unstable narrative. Authorities are notified. At first, the situation is treated with measured caution. Missing persons in a setting like this do not automatically suggest foul play. There are too many variables, too many benign explanations that must be considered before anything more serious is assumed. But the circumstances are unusual. 2 people missing. Last seen together. Last seen boarding an unidentified boat with an unidentified man. No confirmed sightings after that. Search efforts begin. Boats move out across the sounds, tracing paths that feel both methodical and uncertain. The water, so calm on the surface, offers no immediate clues. It reflects the sky, the boats, the movement above, but gives nothing back in terms of answers. Divers are prepared. Helicopters are brought in. From above, the landscape looks deceptively simple. Patches of water, stretches of land, defined boundaries. But those boundaries are misleading. Beneath the surface, the terrain shifts, drops, obscures. Visibility disappears quickly, replaced by darkness that swallows light within meters. Search patterns are established. Grids are mapped. Time becomes a factor. Every hour that passes without discovery shifts the nature of the search. What begins as hope-driven gradually transitions into something more procedural, more focused on recovery than rescue. Families are informed. The news travels quickly, but not cleanly. Details are incomplete, filtered through layers of uncertainty. What reaches them is not a clear narrative, but a series of fragments that do not yet form a whole. They are missing. Last seen on a boat. Searches are underway. That is all. But even in that limited information, there is an undercurrent that is impossible to ignore. Something is wrong. Back in the sounds, the physical search continues, but another kind of search is unfolding simultaneously. The reconstruction of the night. Investigators begin speaking to those who were present, collecting statements, mapping movements, identifying points of contact. Each account adds a piece to the puzzle, but also introduces new inconsistencies. The timeline begins to take shape, but it is not smooth. There are gaps, overlaps, contradictions. The boat remains central. The man remains unknown. Witnesses describe him differently, but certain elements begin to repeat. His presence near Ben and Olivia. His invitation. The movement toward his boat. But without a name, without a clear description, he exists more as an outline than a person. And outlines are difficult to pursue. As the day fades into evening, the reality of the situation becomes harder to soften. They are still missing. No confirmed sightings. No contact. No evidence of where they might have gone. The water remains unchanged. Calm. Unyielding. Holding whatever it holds without indication. And the small white boat, the last known connection, is nowhere to be found. What began as a question has become something else entirely. Not yet a conclusion. But no longer just uncertainty. A space has opened where answers should be. And that space is growing. Because in a place where movement is constant and visibility is limited, disappearance can happen quietly. Without resistance. Without immediate consequence. Until the moment when absence becomes undeniable. And by then, whatever happened is already out of reach. The investigation does not begin with certainty. It begins with fragments, scattered across memory, distorted by alcohol, darkness, and the natural unreliability of human perception. What happened in those early hours exists not as a single narrative, but as dozens of overlapping versions, each one shaped by where someone stood, what they saw, and what they believe they remember. Detectives arrive not at a crime scene, but at an absence. There is no body to examine, no clear point of violence, no physical space that can be sealed off and studied in isolation. The Marlborough Sounds itself becomes the scene, vast and indifferent, offering too many possibilities and too few answers. The water, which might hold evidence, is also the very thing that hides it. The land, dense and uneven, creates countless places where something could have happened unseen. So they begin where they can. With people. Interviews stretch for hours, then days. Witnesses are asked to revisit the night again and again, each time pushing a little deeper, searching for details that might have been overlooked. At first, the accounts are loose, unfocused, shaped more by general impressions than specific observations. But as the questions become more precise, patterns begin to emerge. Ben and Olivia were last seen together. They left a larger boat. They boarded a smaller one. There was a man with them. These points solidify quickly, becoming the backbone of the investigation. Everything else begins to build around them. The boat becomes the first real focal point. Descriptions are gathered, compared, challenged. Some witnesses recall it as a ketch, others hesitate on the term but agree on the general shape. Small. White. A single mast. Nothing distinctive enough to stand out in a crowded anchorage, but specific enough to narrow the field. Investigators begin cataloguing boats that were present that night. Names are recorded. Registrations checked. Owners contacted. One by one, possibilities are eliminated. Boats accounted for, movements confirmed, alibis established. The list shrinks, but it does not disappear. Because there is always one more. Always one that does not fit neatly into the pattern. Parallel to this, the focus shifts to the man. Witnesses are shown photographs. Rows of faces, similar in age, similar in appearance. The process is careful, controlled, designed to avoid suggestion. But memory is not a stable thing. It reshapes itself under pressure, influenced by repetition, by the act of trying to remember. Some witnesses hesitate. Others feel more certain. A face begins to recur. Not universally. Not without disagreement. But enough times to draw attention. The name attached to that face is Scott Watson. At this stage, it is not a conclusion. It is a lead. Watson is known in the area, someone who lives on a boat, someone who would not be out of place in the Marlborough Sounds on a night like that. His presence there does not immediately mark him as suspicious. In fact, it aligns with the environment perfectly. But investigators are not looking for what is normal. They are looking for what stands out. And Watson begins to stand out in small ways. His boat becomes a point of interest. It matches, at least in part, the descriptions provided by witnesses. Not perfectly, but closely enough to warrant further attention. It is a catch. It is white. It is the right size. But again, none of these details are exclusive. There are other boats that share similar characteristics. So the focus shifts again. To behavior. To movement. To inconsistencies. Watson is interviewed. At first, his responses do not set off alarms. He acknowledges being in the area, acknowledges the general circumstances of the night. But as the conversation continues, small discrepancies begin to appear. Details that do not align perfectly with other accounts. Timelines that feel slightly off. On their own, these inconsistencies are not definitive. People misremember. Especially after a night like that. But in the context of an investigation already searching for something to hold on to, they begin to accumulate. Each one adds a little more weight. Each one makes it harder to dismiss the possibility that there is something more beneath the surface. Witnesses are brought back in. Shown Watson's photograph again. Asked to reconsider. Some become more certain. Others remain unsure. A few contradict the emerging narrative entirely, describing a man who does not resemble Watson at all. This is where the investigation begins to strain. Because certainty is not universal. It is selective. And selective certainty is dangerous. Investigators must decide which accounts carry more weight, which inconsistencies can be explained, which can be ignored. It is a process that requires judgment, and judgment is never completely free from bias. Meanwhile, the search for physical evidence continues. Watson's boat is examined. Every surface inspected. Every compartment opened. The process is meticulous, methodical, driven by the need to find something tangible, something that exists outside of memory and perception. At first, there is nothing conclusive. The boat, like many others, shows signs of use, of life lived in a confined space. Personal items, tools, traces of routine. Nothing that directly links it to Ben or Olivia. But then, a detail emerges. Small. Almost insignificant in isolation. A single strand of hair. It is collected, preserved, analyzed. The process takes time. Science does not move as quickly as suspicion. When the result comes back, it carries weight far beyond its size. The hair is said to match Olivia. This becomes a turning point. Because for the first time, there is something physical that connects her to Watson's boat. Something that exists beyond witness statements. Beyond memory. Beyond interpretation. But even this is not without complication. Questions arise almost immediately. How did the hair get there? Was it transferred directly? Indirectly? At what point in time? Could it have been contamination? The answers are not simple. And they are not definitive. But in the context of everything else, the witness identifications, the inconsistencies in Watson's statements, the matching description of the boat, the hair becomes a powerful piece of the narrative. Enough to push the investigation forward. Enough to justify escalation. Watson is arrested in June 1998. The moment is both decisive and uncertain. Because while the investigation has built a case strong enough to act, it is still constructed largely from pieces that do not fit together perfectly. There are still gaps. Still contradictions. Still voices that do not align with the emerging conclusion. Some witnesses remain firm in their belief that Watson is not the man they saw. Others express doubt, uncertainty that grows rather than shrinks with time. Alternative theories begin to surface. Other boats. Other individuals. Possibilities that were not fully explored in the initial focus on Watson. But by this point, the investigation has momentum. And momentum is difficult to redirect. The narrative has begun to solidify. Watson is the man on the boat. The boat is the one Ben and Olivia boarded. Something happened there. Without bodies, Without a clear reconstruction of events, the case relies heavily on inference. On the alignment of probabilities. On the belief that enough pieces point in the same direction to form a coherent whole. But belief is not proof. And the absence of proof leaves room for doubt. As the case moves forward, that doubt does not disappear. It lingers in the background, quiet but persistent. In the inconsistencies of witness testimony. In the questions surrounding the physical evidence. In the simple, undeniable fact that no one knows exactly what happened after that boat disappeared into the darkness. The investigation, for all its effort, cannot fully bridge that gap. It can suggest. It can argue. It can construct a version of events that feels plausible. But it cannot eliminate uncertainty. And in a case defined by absence, uncertainty is not a minor detail. It is the foundation everything else must stand on. By the time the investigation reaches what feels like a turning point, it doesn't arrive as a sudden revelation. There is no single moment where everything clicks into place, no dramatic uncovering of a hidden truth that silences all doubt. Instead, the breakthrough emerges slowly, unevenly, like a shape forming in fog. It is constructed from pressure to find answers, pressure to give meaning to absence, pressure to transform uncertainty into something that can stand in a courtroom. Scott Watson is no longer just a name in a lineup of possibilities. He has become the center of the narrative. But the problem facing investigators is not simply identifying a suspect. It is building a case strong enough to hold under scrutiny, a case that can move beyond suspicion and into conviction. And in a situation where there are no bodies, no definitive timeline of events after the departure of that small boat, every detail carries amplified importance. The breakthrough, if it can be called that, is not a discovery of something entirely new. It is the consolidation of everything that already exists. Witnesses are brought back again. Not once. Not twice. But repeatedly. Each session is more focused than the last. The questions become sharper, less open-ended. Investigators are no longer just asking what happened, they are guiding witnesses toward specific points, specific moments, specific identifications. The human mind, when revisiting memory, does not simply retrieve information. It reshapes it. Details that were once uncertain begin to feel more solid through repetition. Faces that were once vaguely familiar become more recognizable. The act of remembering becomes intertwined with the act of reconstructing. Some witnesses begin to express increased confidence. They look at Watson's photograph and feel something click into place, even if that certainty was not there before. They recall his presence more clearly, his position on the boat, the way he spoke, the way he moved. Others resist that clarity. Their uncertainty remains intact, even deepens. They question their own earlier statements, hesitate where they once spoke more freely. For them, the image does not sharpen. It blurs. This division becomes one of the defining tensions in the case. Because the investigation must decide which version of memory to trust. Parallel to this, the physical evidence is revisited, examined with greater intensity. The strand of hair becomes more than just a piece of evidence. It becomes a focal point. Experts are brought in, not just to confirm its origin, but to explain its significance. The prosecution's narrative leans heavily on the idea that this hair places Olivia on Watson's boat, that it is a direct link between victim and suspect. But the defense begins to push back, not by denying the existence of the hair, but by questioning its journey. How did it get there? When did it get there? Could it have been transferred through indirect contact, through shared spaces, through objects that moved between environments? These questions do not dismantle the evidence, but they complicate it. They introduce alternative pathways that weaken the simplicity of the prosecution's claim. And yet, in the absence of stronger physical proof, the hair remains central. It is something tangible in a case defined by intangibility. Investigators also begin to focus more intensely on Watson's behavior, both before and after the night in question. Patterns are examined. His movements are tracked as precisely as possible. His statements are analyzed not just for what they say, but for how they shift over time. Inconsistencies that might once have been dismissed as normal variations in memory are now framed as indicators of deception. A timeline is constructed. Not a perfect one, but one that aligns Watson's presence, his boat, and the disappearance of Ben and Olivia into a sequence that feels coherent. This is where the breakthrough truly takes shape. Not in the discovery of a missing piece, but in the arrangement of existing pieces into a narrative that appears complete. The small white ketch seen by witnesses becomes Watson's boat. The unidentified man becomes Watson. The departure from the larger vessel becomes the last confirmed moment before the crime. And what happens after that is filled in not with direct evidence, but with inference. This is both the strength and the weakness of the case. Because a well-constructed narrative can be incredibly persuasive. It provides structure. It answers questions. It replaces uncertainty with a version of events that feels logical, even inevitable. But it is still a construction. And constructions can be flawed. As the investigation solidifies around Watson, alternative leads begin to fade. Not necessarily because they have been fully explored and dismissed, but because they no longer fit the dominant narrative. Other boats that might have matched the description receive less attention. Other individuals who were present that night become peripheral. The focus narrows. And with that narrowing comes a sense of direction. For investigators, this is progress. For others, it is a point of concern. Because narrowing too early, too decisively, can create blind spots. The case moves forward anyway. Watson is no longer just a suspect. He is the suspect. Charges are prepared. The evidence, incomplete as it may be, is deemed sufficient. The combination of witness identifications, behavioral inconsistencies, and the presence of Olivia's hair on his boat forms the backbone of the prosecution's argument. But beneath this apparent solidity, tension remains. The absence of bodies is not just a missing detail. It is a void that cannot be filled. Without them, there is no definitive cause of death. No clear method. No timeline that extends beyond the last sighting. Everything after that point exists in a space of assumption. And assumptions, no matter how reasonable, are not the same as proof. The breakthrough, then, is not a moment of clarity. It is a moment of commitment. A decision to move forward with what exists, to present it as a cohesive whole, to argue that the pieces, when viewed together, point in one direction strongly enough to outweigh their individual weaknesses. For the families of Ben and Olivia, this moment carries its own complexity. On one hand, there is relief. A sense that the investigation is progressing, that someone has been identified, that the search for accountability is not drifting endlessly. On the other hand, there is an undercurrent of uncertainty. Because even as the case advances, the fundamental questions remain unanswered. What happened on that boat? How did those final moments unfold? Where are they? These questions do not disappear with the identification of a suspect. They persist, unresolved, existing alongside the narrative that is being built. As the case prepares to enter the next phase, the weight of expectation grows. The investigation has done its part, assembling a story from fragments, shaping it into something that can be presented, argued, defended. But the transition from investigation to prosecution introduces a new set of challenges. Because what feels convincing in an investigative context must now withstand the scrutiny of a courtroom. Every inconsistency will be examined. Every assumption challenged. Every gap exposed. The breakthrough, for all its significance, is not an end. It is a threshold. A point where the case shifts from being a search for answers to a contest of interpretations. And in that contest, the same elements that propelled the investigation forward, the reliance on memory, the weight of inference, the absence of definitive proof, will become the very things that are questioned most aggressively. The narrative is set. The suspect is identified. The case is ready to be tested. But beneath the surface, the uncertainty remains, waiting for the moment when it will be brought fully into the light. The courtroom does not feel like the Marlborough Sounds. There is no open water here, no shifting horizon, no darkness that can swallow detail. Everything is contained, structured, defined by boundaries that are meant to hold truth in place. Light is steady, unchanging. Every face is visible. Every word is recorded. The chaos of that night has been translated into something rigid, something that can be examined piece by piece. And yet, the absence that defined the case from the beginning is still present. It sits quietly between every question and every answer. Scott Watson enters this space not as a possibility, but as a man accused of murder. The weight of that accusation reshapes everything around him. His movements are observed more closely, his expressions interpreted, his silence filled with meaning whether it holds any or not. He maintains his position from the start. He is not guilty. He has nothing to do with what happened to Ben Smart and Olivia Hope. That assertion becomes the foundation of his defense, repeated with consistency, without deviation. It is simple, direct, and unchanging. But simplicity does not guarantee belief. The prosecution begins by constructing their version of the night. Not as a collection of uncertainties, but as a sequence. They take the fragments gathered during the investigation and arrange them into a timeline that feels coherent, deliberate. The celebration. The movement between boats. The moment Ben and Olivia leave the larger vessel. The presence of a man. The small white ketch. The disappearance. Each element is presented with confidence, framed as part of a larger pattern that points toward Watson. Witnesses take the stand. One by one, they revisit that night, now under conditions far removed from the environment in which their memories were formed. There is no alcohol here, no noise, no shifting decks beneath their feet. There is only stillness, and the expectation that what they say must be precise. Some speak with certainty. They identify Watson as the man they saw, their voices steady, their recollections clear. They describe his presence, his proximity to Ben and Olivia, the way he interacted with them before they left. Others are less certain. Their answers contain hesitation, small pauses that stretch longer than they did during earlier interviews. They acknowledge the difficulty of remembering clearly, the limitations of what they saw in the darkness, the influence of time on memory. The defense focuses on these moments. They do not need to disprove every identification. They only need to introduce doubt. They ask about lighting conditions, about distance, about the effects of alcohol. They point out inconsistencies between statements given at different times. They highlight differences between witnesses, emphasizing that not everyone saw the same man, not everyone described him the same way. Memory, they argue, is not a fixed record. It is fluid. And in a case where so much depends on what people believe they saw, that fluidity becomes a critical weakness. The prosecution counters by emphasizing consistency where it exists. They focus on the overlapping details, the repeated elements that appear across multiple accounts. They argue that while individual memories may be imperfect, the collective pattern is reliable. The small white ketch becomes central. Experts and witnesses describe it, anchoring its image in the minds of the jury. They connect that image to Watson's boat, reinforcing the idea that this is not coincidence, but identification. Then comes the physical evidence. The strand of hair. It is presented carefully, methodically, as something tangible in a case dominated by intangibility. Experts explain the analysis, the process by which it was linked to Olivia. The implication is clear. She was on Watson's boat. The defense approaches this evidence differently. They do not deny its existence. They question its certainty. They explore the possibility of transfer, the ways in which a hair might move from one environment to another without direct contact. They raise concerns about handling, about contamination, about the chain of custody. The argument is not that the hair proves nothing. It is that it does not prove enough. The courtroom becomes a space of competing narratives. On one side, a story that connects the dots, that fills in the gaps with inference and probability, that presents a version of events where Watson is the final link in a chain that leads to disappearance and death. On the other, a story that emphasizes those gaps, that resists the urge to fill them, that insists on the difference between possibility and proof. Watson's own statements are brought into focus. The prosecution highlights inconsistencies, moments where his account shifts, where details do not align perfectly with other evidence. These inconsistencies are framed as indicators of deception, as signs that he is concealing something. The defense offers alternative interpretations. Memory is imperfect, they argue, especially when recounting events that did not seem significant at the time. Small discrepancies do not equate to guilt. They are a natural part of human recollection. As the trial progresses, the absence of bodies becomes increasingly significant. It is addressed directly, acknowledged as unusual but not unprecedented. The prosecution argues that a lack of physical remains does not negate the existence of a crime, especially when other evidence points toward it. The defense leans into that absence. Without bodies, there is no definitive proof of death. No cause. No method. No timeline beyond the last sighting. Everything that follows is assumption. And assumption, they remind the jury, is not enough to convict. The emotional weight of the case is impossible to ignore. The families of Ben and Olivia are present, their grief visible but controlled, carried with a quiet strength that fills the room without needing to be expressed loudly. Their presence is a constant reminder of what is at stake, of the lives that have been interrupted, of the answers that have yet to be found. But the courtroom demands more than emotion. It demands proof. Or at least, proof beyond reasonable doubt. Closing arguments bring everything together. The prosecution reiterates their narrative, emphasizing the alignment of evidence, the consistency of key witness accounts, the presence of Olivia's hair on Watson's boat. They present the case as a puzzle where enough pieces are in place to reveal the full picture. The defense returns to uncertainty. They do not offer a complete alternative explanation for what happened. They do not need to. Their focus remains on what cannot be proven, on the gaps that remain unfilled, on the possibility that the wrong man is being held accountable for something that has not been fully understood. The jury is left to navigate these competing perspectives. To weigh certainty against doubt. To decide whether the narrative presented by the prosecution is strong enough to overcome the absence of definitive proof. Deliberation takes time. Not because the case is simple, but because it is not. Every piece of evidence must be reconsidered, every argument revisited, every doubt measured against the need for resolution. When the verdict is delivered, it does not come with clarity. It comes with finality. Scott Watson is found guilty of the murders of Ben Smart and Olivia Hope. The sentence is life imprisonment, with a minimum term set before the possibility of parole. In that moment, the courtroom shifts. For some, it is the conclusion they have been waiting for, a confirmation that the investigation led to the right place, that accountability has been established. For others, it is not an end. It is the beginning of a different kind of question. Because the verdict does not answer everything. It cannot. It does not reveal what happened in those final moments on the boat. It does not explain the absence of bodies. It does not resolve the inconsistencies that were raised during the trial. It establishes legal responsibility. But it does not eliminate uncertainty. Watson maintains his position. He did not do this. That assertion does not change with the verdict. It persists, carried forward into appeals, into reviews, into the ongoing conversation that surrounds the case. The courtroom empties eventually. The structured space that held the arguments, the evidence, the decision, returns to stillness. But the story does not end there. Because justice, in this case, is not a clean conclusion. It is a point in a much longer narrative. One that continues to be examined, questioned, and revisited long after the verdict has been delivered. Time does not close this case. It stretches it. Years pass, then decades, and instead of settling into something quiet and resolved, the story continues to shift, carried forward by questions that refuse to fade. The Marlborough Sounds remains unchanged in the way places often do. The water still folds around the land in the same intricate patterns. Boats still gather there when the weather allows. On certain nights, laughter still drifts across the surface, echoing in ways that sound almost identical to that night in 1997. But for those who remember, it is never just a place again. It becomes layered. What is visible sits on top of what is known, and beneath both lies what is still uncertain. For the families of Ben Smart and Olivia Hope, time moves differently. It does not erase. It reorganizes. Grief, in the early days, is sharp and immediate, cutting through everything else. It demands attention, consumes energy, reshapes daily life in ways that feel impossible to manage. But as years pass, it does not disappear. It settles into something quieter, more constant, less visible from the outside but no less present. There are anniversaries that return each year, carrying the weight of memory with them. There are ordinary days that become difficult without warning, triggered by something small, a place, a song, a fragment of conversation. There is the ongoing absence, not just of the people themselves, but of the answers that might have brought some form of closure. Because closure, in cases like this, is not just about a verdict. It is about understanding. And understanding remains incomplete. The conviction of Scott Watson brought a form of resolution, but not a complete one. It established a legal outcome, defined responsibility in the eyes of the court. For some, that was enough. For others, it was only part of the picture. Watson's continued insistence on his innocence keeps the case from settling. He does not shift his position. He does not offer partial admissions or alternative explanations. He maintains, with consistency, that he was not the man responsible for what happened that night. That insistence becomes a thread that runs through the years that follow, picked up by lawyers, by journalists, by individuals who look at the case and see not certainty, but possibility. Possibility that something was missed. Possibility that the evidence, when viewed differently, might lead somewhere else. Reviews are requested. Appeals are filed. Each one brings the case back into focus, pulling it out of the past and into the present again. Documents are revisited. Testimonies re-examined. Details that once seemed settled are questioned once more. The strand of hair is analyzed again, its significance debated in new contexts, under evolving scientific standards. Witness statements are reconsidered, not just for what they say, but for how they were formed, how they may have been influenced over time. The same elements that built the case are now used to test it. This is not unusual in complex cases, especially those without physical remains. But in this case, the absence of bodies continues to amplify every uncertainty. Without them, there is no final confirmation of what happened, no definitive narrative that can be reconstructed beyond doubt. The story remains open. Not legally, perhaps, but emotionally, intellectually. Public opinion reflects this divide. Some see the conviction as justified, the result of careful investigation and a reasonable interpretation of the available evidence. Others see it as flawed, a case built too heavily on inference, too reliant on memory, too willing to fill gaps with assumption. The division is not always loud. It does not always manifest in arguments or confrontations. Often, it exists quietly, in conversations, in articles, in the way people choose to interpret the same set of facts differently. This is one of the enduring aspects of the case. It does not offer a single, uncontested truth. It offers competing versions of what might have happened, each one supported by different interpretations of the same evidence. And in that space between versions, doubt lives. Not necessarily doubt of everything, but doubt of enough. Enough to keep the conversation going. Enough to prevent the story from becoming fixed. The Marlborough Sounds continues to hold its silence. Searches, over the years, have not yielded what many hoped for. No discovery has emerged that definitively explains what happened after that small boat drifted away. The water, which once reflected celebration, remains unchanged in its refusal to reveal what it has taken. This silence becomes part of the story. Not just an absence of sound, but an absence of answers. It forces those who seek understanding to rely on what exists above the surface, on testimony, on evidence, on interpretation, while knowing that something essential remains out of reach. There is a lesson here, though it is not a simple one. It is not about fear, or caution, or the idea that danger is always present. It is about the fragility of certainty. How easily it can be constructed. How easily it can be questioned. How a single night, made up of ordinary decisions, can become something that resists explanation for decades. It is also about memory. How it shapes reality, not just in the moment, but long after. How the act of remembering is not passive, but active, influenced by time, by repetition, by the need to make sense of what does not easily make sense. And it is about justice. Not as a fixed point, but as a process. One that seeks answers, but does not always find them completely. One that makes decisions, but does not always eliminate doubt. For those who listen to this story, who follow its threads from that night in 1997 through the years that followed, there is an unavoidable tension. The desire for resolution. And the recognition that resolution may never be complete. Ben Smart and Olivia Hope remain at the center of that tension. Not as symbols, but as people whose lives were interrupted in a way that cannot be fully explained. Their absence continues to shape everything that surrounds the case, from the investigation to the trial to the ongoing discussions that keep their names present. In the end, the story does not return to where it began. It cannot. The laughter that once drifted across the water that night exists now only in memory, separate from what followed. The celebration that marked the turning of the year is forever tied to the disappearance that occurred within it. And somewhere, in the space between what is known and what is not, the truth remains. Not lost, but incomplete. Waiting, perhaps, in a place where certainty cannot easily reach. And until that changes, if it ever does, the Marlborough Sounds will continue to hold more than just water and land. It will hold a question that has never been fully answered. There is a point in every long-running case where the story stops being about what happened and starts becoming about what remains unresolved. For the disappearance of Ben Smart and Olivia Hope, that point never truly arrived, because nothing ever fully closed. Instead, the case exists in a suspended state, held together by conviction on one side and doubt on the other, neither able to completely erase the existence of the other. Scott Watson continues to serve his sentence, and with each passing year, his presence in the story becomes less physical and more symbolic. To some, he represents accountability established through a difficult and imperfect process. To others, he represents the possibility of irreversible error, a reminder that certainty in the absence of complete evidence can still lead to life-altering consequences. The legal system, once it delivered its verdict, moved forward. Appeals were heard, reviews were considered, evidence was re-examined under evolving standards. Nothing that followed managed to fully dislodge the original outcome, but nothing entirely silenced the questions either. The case settled into a rare and uncomfortable space where a conclusion exists in law, but not in collective understanding. This is where the story remains. Not in the courtroom. Not in the investigation files. But in the persistence of uncertainty. For the families, time has not transformed the core of what was lost. It has only changed its shape. The absence of Ben and Olivia is no longer a sudden rupture, it is a long-term condition, woven into every year that follows. There are no final conversations, no eventual return, no moment where the story corrects itself. There is only continuation without resolution, memory without physical return, love without the possibility of response. And yet, their presence endures in a different form. In recollection. In testimony. In the details that refuse to fade even when larger narratives shift around them. Ben remains the young man who moved through life with quiet steadiness, whose reliability was not loud but deeply felt. Olivia remains the young woman whose openness made the world around her feel more immediate, more alive, more connected. They are not reduced by the passage of time. If anything, the absence intensifies the clarity with which they are remembered. The Marlborough Sounds continues to exist as it always has, indifferent to the meaning imposed upon it by human events. Boats still pass through its channels. Light still changes across its water. The landscape does not hold memory in the way people do. It does not retain emotion. It simply remains. But for those who know the story, it is no longer just a landscape. It is a reference point. A location permanently linked to a moment that cannot be fully reconstructed. A place where celebration and disappearance overlapped without warning, and where the boundary between presence and absence became indistinguishable within the span of a single night. Over time, the case has also become something broader than its original facts. It has entered public discussion not only as a legal matter, but as an example of how justice operates in the absence of complete information. It raises questions that extend beyond one night, beyond one trial, beyond one outcome. Questions about memory, about inference, about how societies decide what level of uncertainty they are willing to accept when making irreversible decisions. There are no easy answers to those questions. There never were. What remains is tension. Between belief and doubt. Between closure and uncertainty. Between what was proven in court and what cannot be fully verified outside it. The story of Ben Smart and Olivia Hope does not conclude in a traditional sense. It does not resolve into clarity that satisfies every perspective. Instead, it continues to exist as a layered narrative, shaped by evidence, contested by interpretation, and sustained by the absence of what would have ended it definitively. And perhaps that is the most enduring aspect of all. Not the investigation, not the trial, but the fact that, even now, decades later, the central question has not changed. It is still about what happened in those final moments on the water, when a night of celebration shifted into something irreversible, and when a small white boat drifted away from visibility into a space that has never fully been recovered. Everything else, the arguments, the convictions, the appeals, the theories, exists around that single point of disappearance. A point that remains, even now, beyond complete reach. And so the story does not end. It simply continues, carried forward by memory, by doubt, and by the enduring absence of an answer that can finally bring it to rest. There is always a temptation, when a story has been told and retold for years, to believe that somewhere within its repetition the truth will eventually sharpen itself into clarity. That if you circle it often enough, examine it from enough angles, strip away enough uncertainty, what remains will finally settle into something solid. But the case of Ben Smart and Olivia Hope resists that expectation. It does not resolve under scrutiny. It fractures further. What remains instead is a collection of fixed points surrounded by movement that never fully stabilizes. Two young people last seen stepping from one boat to another on a summer night in the Marlborough Sounds. A small white vessel drifting away from a larger gathering. A man whose identity became the axis of an entire investigation. A trial that reached a conclusion without ever being able to reconstruct the full sequence of events. A conviction that provided legal closure while leaving emotional and factual gaps untouched. These elements do not change over time. What changes is the way they are interpreted. With distance, the night itself becomes harder to hold in a single frame. Witness accounts that once felt aligned begin to separate when revisited in detail. The same moment described from different positions produces variations that cannot be fully reconciled. Memory, once treated as a guide, reveals itself as a layered reconstruction influenced by attention, emotion, and the simple limitations of human perception in low light, at distance, under distraction. Yet the justice system cannot operate within ambiguity alone. It requires decisions. It requires conclusions. And in the absence of physical resolution, those conclusions are drawn from the convergence of probability, inference, and credibility. That is where the case of Scott Watson ultimately settled, not in certainty beyond doubt, but in certainty beyond reasonable doubt as defined within the structure of the court. Outside of that structure, the boundaries are less rigid. Questions remain about how memory was weighted, how competing accounts were evaluated, how alternative possibilities were narrowed as the investigation progressed. There are those who argue that the focus on a single suspect created a gravitational pull that shaped the interpretation of surrounding evidence. Others maintain that the alignment of witness accounts and physical findings was sufficient to support the outcome reached. Both positions exist simultaneously, neither fully eliminating the other. This tension is part of what keeps the case alive in public consciousness long after the legal proceedings have ended. It is not just a matter of what happened, but of how certainty is constructed when direct evidence is limited. The absence of bodies does not simply represent a gap in the narrative, it transforms the entire structure of proof. Every inference carries more weight. Every inconsistency carries more significance. Every detail becomes more sensitive to interpretation. For those who knew Ben and Olivia personally, these debates exist in parallel with something more fundamental. The legal arguments, the evidentiary discussions, the procedural examinations all unfold in a space that cannot touch the core reality of their absence. What remains for them is not theory, but loss. Not probability, but finality in its most human form. And yet even grief, over time, does not remain static. It changes shape. It becomes less about the immediate shock of disappearance and more about the long-term reality of absence. Conversations that were once about searching shift into remembering. The question of what happened gradually shares space with the question of who they were. Lives are reconstructed not from the moment they ended, but from everything that came before it. In that reconstruction, Ben is still present as someone defined by steadiness, by reliability, by a kind of grounded presence that others naturally oriented around. Olivia remains present as someone whose openness and energy shaped the atmosphere around her, making interactions feel more immediate, more connected, more alive. These qualities do not diminish with time. If anything, they become more distinct as the noise of the surrounding narrative fades. The Marlborough Sounds, meanwhile, continues its own existence outside of interpretation. It does not retain memory. It does not differentiate between nights marked by celebration and nights remembered for loss. The water moves as it always has, through channels carved long before human events gave them additional meaning. Boats pass through, weather changes, seasons shift. From its own perspective, nothing remains unresolved. But human perspective is not so easily detached. Places absorb meaning even when they do not hold memory themselves. And so the sounds remains associated with that night, not because the landscape changed, but because the human experience within it did. One moment in time became fixed against a backdrop that otherwise continues without interruption. Over the years, the case has also come to represent something broader than its individual facts. It sits within discussions about how justice systems manage uncertainty, how societies respond to crimes without physical resolution, how narratives are formed when direct evidence is limited and interpretation becomes central. It is cited not only as a criminal case, but as an example of the complexities inherent in reconstructing events that occur in conditions of limited visibility, fragmented testimony, and absence of physical recovery. In that sense, it has outgrown its original boundaries. It is no longer only about one night. It is about the limits of reconstruction itself. What can be known? What must be inferred? What remains permanently beyond reach? And in that space between knowledge and absence, the case continues to exist, not as a closed chapter, but as an ongoing point of reference. Because some events do not conclude in the way stories are expected to conclude. They do not resolve into clarity or fade into obscurity. They remain present in a different form, sustained by the questions that surround them rather than the answers they provide. And so the disappearance of Ben Smart and Olivia Hope remains exactly that, a disappearance not only of individuals, but of certainty itself, leaving behind a narrative that continues to be examined, questioned, and remembered. Without ever fully arriving at a place where it can be said to be complete.